That's interesting, all that you were saying, because I don't remember any of that yesterday. I have no idea what happened yesterday. No, yesterday was amazing. That was my first time playing rugby. As the other people playing rugby clearly could attest to, that was my first time. They were aware of this. The talent show last night was amazing, by the way. That was spectacular. The dance was so good. That was such a great night. I'm just having such a good time being here. This is really special for me. And I don't want to just go on every time, but just to say a bit about Phil's leadership and the character of this community here. I know I mentioned last night having this sense that especially for me right now in this season, there are just reasons that I needed to be here that aren't just about, stuff to bring to you, but things that you bring to me. And man, I'm just feeling that. Jared's teaching on contemplative prayer this morning was so wonderful. And I just wept through that all morning. I mean, I'm just a mess in general. And actually, this is not related to not just today. This has nothing to do with the sermon this morning, by the way. This is just a fun story to tell about all that. As even this notion of, and I talked about last night, becoming more comfortable with being dependent on people and needing people and all of that. It's just so not native to me. I mean, I'm a large person. I want to be able to kind of carry my own. I hate depending on other people. And I feel like part of what this whole last season of my life has been is having to kind of accept a bit of the gift of humiliation, which is, I think, often a gift that the Lord uses. And so the best story of all time about this for me really is, I guess this was about a year and a half ago. So this was maybe 6 months after I left the church that I'd found in Charlotte. And, still a lot of difficult things happening relationally and all that, but kind of ready to be back out there and do what I felt like I was supposed to be doing. And I got invited to go and speak in Sweden. I've never been to Sweden before, and I was really excited about this because not only just to see it and experience it for the first time, but I'm a huge fan of the director Ingmar Bergman. Anybody know, Bergman films? They are the happiest movies ever. They will just cheer you right up. They're sort of just kidding. They're depressing as hell. If you have remote suicidal tendencies, please do not watch it. If there's any, they're the bleakest movies ever, but I love them. They're very existential. They wrestle with all these theological questions, etc. And I love Bergman movies. And I found out that when I was going, days before I was supposed to speak for the first time, there was an Ingmar Bergman film festival there on Faro, the little island where he lived, and shot half of his movies. So I got so excited. So booked my ticket, got there a few days early, and got to Stockholm first. Then I flew over to Visby, this little town that was built in the 1100s, which is the only way you can get to Faro. I'd been on the ground for about 2 hours, and I really thought about this yesterday because it was just like yesterday insofar. Not quite as long as a flight, but I didn't sleep at all on the plane. And I came in so sleep deprived. I was The Walking Dead. I was just completely out of it. And I got my little rental car in that town and was ready to take off and explore and all that. One more bit of context here. You have to understand, I have a dread fear, actually, of coming into any environment internationally and being the stupid American. That is my greatest fear. Because, whatever negative stereotypes you have about Americans, I promise, I would not resist any of them. I mean, look at Donald Trump's poll numbers. I'm grateful you'd still have me here right now. You know what I'm saying? Just like guilt by association. Just because we're allowing it to go on is probably a reason to not let Americans into Australia until something demonstrative is done. We are ridiculous people. And so I'm just scared to death of looking ridiculous somewhere else, So I get to Sweden, get my little rental car, a stick shift, and a little bit different than the kind we have back home. But I was getting around okay. But I'm going through that little town that was built in the 1100s, and, the streets weren't made for cars, really, and they're just so narrow. So finally I was going down this little hill where I thought for a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. And I thought because I was sleep deprived, it was like an optical illusion. As it turns out, that was not the case. It really was getting more narrow. And there were two buildings beside me. By the time you get to the bottom, you could barely get a bicycle through. It was so tight. And by the time I realized this, I'm halfway down the hill and have not yet had to put that car in reverse. So I tried to put it in reverse and couldn't get it to do it. In fact, every time I go to neutral to do that, I would just roll further down the hill. And I did this 4 or 5 different times until finally, no exaggeration, I was completely wedged between the walls. When I say wedged, I don't just mean there was no space in between. I mean wedged. I mean it ended up being $1,000 worth of damage to the car. I mean wedged. And there was no sunroof. There was no so the only thing the only way I knew how to get out of that car, I would have had to broken the front or back windshield to get out of it. There was no going anywhere. And I'm just sitting there. It was a little Volkswagen Here's my 6'5", 230-pound self. And I just thinking, what am I going to do here? I mean, I had no idea. I just sat there for a few minutes. Finally, at the bottom of the hill, there was actually a pub, and some people came up from around the corner. And I'm thinking, like, should I flag them down? Do I get their attention? What do I do? And they actually started taking pictures of me with their cell phone. You can't make this up. They started taking pictures. They went back in and got some more friends from the pub who also took pictures. I promise this is not preacher overstatement. I guarantee you at least 30 to 40 people came out and took pictures. And it was funny because before that, especially because I love Ingmar Bergman and all that, I loved Sweden. I wanted to marry the country of Sweden. And then all of a sudden, that moment, I just hated Sweden. Like, I hated it. I decided I was going to go home and sell my Volvo, that I was never going to shop at IKEA again. I hated that damn Swedish chef. Like, it was the whole, like, anything I could think of that I could connect to Sweden. I hated it all for a few moments. But finally, this nice man came out from around the corner who actually did call a tow truck. And the tow truck came like an hour and a half later and hooked up the little line to my car and reeled me back up. So the crowd is still down there watching me while I'm just sitting in the car, and they're reeling me back up. When I finally get back at the top, I notice a guy who has a really long, like, professional camera. And he had a few questions for me. Turns out he worked for the local paper there. And again, you can't make this up, and why would I? The next morning, keep in mind this happened my first 2 hours on the ground. The next morning, my picture was on the front page of their paper. The headline translated from Swedish was, "Oh no, not again, another American stuck in alley." Apparently that happens 2 or 3 times a year. Isn't that great? At the last line in the article, because, he was asking me what I was doing in Sweden. I wasn't about to tell him that I was there to speak at churches and seminaries. Like, I was not going to drag the body of Christ into it. I just said, I'm here for the Ingmar Bergman Film Festival. And so the last line of the article was, Martin, a Bergman enthusiast, says, I got my own drama, which is what I said to them. It was really, that was one of the worst things that ever happened to me. But it feels like so symbolic of this time in my life of learning how to be dependent and learning how to trust and learning how to need others and not just be the one who's needed. That, again, was just entirely for your entertainment. I mean, there's almost nothing connected about that. In a few minutes, we're going to go to, so thanks. We're going to Luke 13, though. And I just wanted to see if I could kill the sweet spirit in the room. No. So that's the thing. Like, even yesterday, I thought, I've never played rugby before. I look stupid. Not as stupid as I looked in Sweden in that car. So that's my reference point now. It always could be worse. Let's actually pray before we look at the text and we go a little further. Lord, I am so just grateful for the sweetness of your presence and the sweetness of these people. I sense you so profoundly at work in them through their gentleness, through their tenderness, and through their love. And I thank you for that. That's clearly been embedded by the leadership here, is this kind of tenderness. That doesn't come without prayer and without a lot of love and sacrifice. So I'm grateful this is a safe place and a safe community. And I'm thankful, Lord, just for the open-heartedness and the open-handedness of this community, Lord. It is such a beautiful witness of what you're like. And I thank you for the way that they just reveal you, Jesus. In the spirit of that, we want you to reveal yourself now. Through the proclamation of your word, we want you to make yourself known. We want you to make your heart known. We want you to reveal yourself in that way that only your spirit can do, not through the transmission of information or facts or ideas about you, but truly just a revelation of your heart that always draws us closer to yourself. We ask this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Before we look at the text, one more story that is connected, I think. So to me, part of the gift of experiences like this, having a weekend like this, part of why we do this is that when we hit the pause button and we get away, there's a chance for us to get a different kind of perspective on our lives, to look at the same scenarios, the same relationships, the same experiences from a different place, just to get a very different kind of perspective. I think that's so crucial. I don't feel the need or pressure, as I know sometimes you can, especially for those like myself who have a Pentecostal upbringing, to make this the biggest, baddest retreat you've ever had. God just showed up even bigger in every service. Like, it's not, not trying to outdo anything. It's not that kind of thing at all. Yet, I don't minimize that experiences like this can be extremely transformative. One of the most transformative experiences I've ever had was in the midst of this whole season. It was during the time where, and I think I talked about this a bit yesterday, but I had gone back to the church that I pastored after a sabbatical, hoping to sort some things, and really wasn't in a better place and felt like I was just falling apart. And I went on a spiritual retreat, individual retreat to San Diego. This place I found online, it was a Catholic retreat center where I knew there was a nun who was a spiritual director who would meet with me every day, and just felt like I needed to just get away and get with God to get some kind of direction and clarity. And that week that I spent turned out to be so monumental. I felt like it was, for one, the first time that I had a sense of permission that I could leave the church, in fact, that I needed to leave the church to kind of just be a human being and process stuff. There was a lot that happened, but so much of it for me was all about this dramatic shift in perspective. I think because I'm the sort of person who, all the more in these last few years, I try to be pretty transparent about faults or flaws or issues. I can talk about that. I would like to think I'm a humble person. I understand that's ironic in of itself, that if you think of yourself as a humble person, then you're proud. I'll say I aspire to be a humble person. I'd want to be a humble person. And I think at that point especially, I certainly didn't feel proud. But one of the things that was a big revelation of that week is that I realized I had a very different kind of pride. Not that kind of arrogance that says, like, I'm great, I'm together, I've got stuff people need. But that kind of arrogance that comes from assuming that you're more important in the lives of other people than you really are. Assuming that you're necessary in ways that you're not. Thinking that God needs you more than God does to run the cosmos. I had no idea how inflated all of that was in me. Because especially with the church, it's like I'd founded it 9 years before, and I thought, I can't leave this, because who else would do it? There's too much weight. There's too much that I do that's important. I could never step away. So it felt like all week, everything that happened was about shifting perspective. This nun, she was in her early 70s. Her name is Sister Ann. I refer to her as the Ignatian Ninja. Real sweet lady, like these piercing blue eyes and like just soft features, kind of this tan older woman. And man, she just took me apart every day. Like the ninja thing, like did they just touch a tank and it falls apart? That's what it felt like. I mean, it was just gracious. She just unraveled me over and over again. But she kept doing things to shift my perspective, small things. She had me walk the cliffs in San Diego one day and just meditate, and inviting me to feel the wind, the spirit at work in the wind and in the rocks and the trees, asking me to take small stones and throw them into the ocean, representing my problems, and just little things like that I do every day. One night she told me, knowing that I was dealing with a lot of fear, to wrap myself up in a blanket and to literally imagine that blanket was the love of God and I was being embraced by God. All these things that just kept shifting perspective in me in different ways. I remember one day in particular where I was looking over, there's this beautiful point that kind of overlooks the whole city. And it's like, I just got this sense like never before in my life of just how small I really was. I'm looking at the ocean, looking at the rocks. I'm looking at the city. I'm also looking at the peak there was a graveyard there. And I just don't think it ever hit me quite that way. Like, wow, every day, thousands of people are being born. Thousands of people are dying. All of this started so long before I got here. All of this will go on so long after I'm gone. And just grasping like how small I really am. Not in a way that brought condemnation. Like it actually was pretty liberating. I think it was the first time, honestly, as a relatively young person, I'm 37, that I ever contemplated my own death. Looking at that graveyard. And it's like, I know intellectually I'm going to die, but I don't think I ever believed it. It was like, oh, wait a second. I'm actually going to die like everybody, like anybody. That could happen anytime. I'm not immortal. I'm not invincible. All these things that just grasping my smallness as a created being. And that just seems so important to me. I remember one day in particular, Sister Ann told me, I'll never forget her saying this, because I was struggling, with shame on one hand, and on the other hand, my sense of calling and all that. So this is what she told me. She said, Jonathan, it's like, You're like a 2-year-old to the Lord. So to keep this in perspective, she said, whenever like you do something really bad, whenever you feel like you really screw up, for God, it's like if a 2-year-old messes in his diapers. It's just like it happens all the time. I mean, God doesn't want you to be uncomfortable and like keep soiling your diapers or something. But that's what it's like. It's like the mess of a 2-year-old. It's not shocking. It's not offensive. It's like that. Your biggest mess is like that to the Lord. She says, on the other hand, that's also true about your biggest successes. And she knew about my book, Prototype, and she said, like that book you wrote. She said, to God, that's like when a 2-year-old comes in the kitchen and says, hey, look at this picture I drew. And God says, oh, isn't that beautiful? Not because it's a great picture, but because, oh, that's so sweet that he attempted that. I'll put that up on my refrigerator. And that's the biggest success of my life, right? All of that just had a way of putting so much into perspective. I'm wondering, in particular, in what way God would want to do that in your life during this time. To just, again, same information, same facts, same nexus of relationships, all the same stuff you're doing before. You're still you. But how are you supposed to look at some of these things from a different place? How are you supposed to look from a different perspective? The text I wanted to go to is a peculiar one that I had not spent a lot of time thinking about until recently. Luke chapter 13. And it's one of those really strange Jesus stories. Luke 13, beginning with verse 1. It says, at that very time, there were some present who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. He asked them, do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were worse sinners than all other Galileans? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will all perish as they did. Or those 18 who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, do you think that they were worse offenders than all the others living in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will all perish just as they did. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it and found none. For he said to the gardener, see here, for 3 years I've come looking for fruit on this fig tree, and still I find none. Cut it down. Why should it be wasting the soil? He replied, sir, let it alone, or let it be for 1 more year, until I dig around it and put manure on it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good, but if not, you can cut it down. Is that anybody's life verse anywhere in there? Like, these are just super encouraging verses. It's obscure, right? Apparently, the context is in Jesus' day, just recently, because we know in antiquity, Pilate had a reputation for being especially brutal. He was especially nasty, loved to make an example of people. Apparently, what just happened is that in one of these many small revolts, where some of these Galileans would attempt some kind of small-scale uprising, Pilate decided to make an example of them by not only killing them, but mingling their blood in the temple so that it would be disreputable, and he would make an example. And it was scandalous. It was shocking. Like sometimes you hear stories about a particularly shocking or grisly murder. I mean, this was just what everybody's talking about around the water cooler. So everybody's been having this conversation about what happens. And Jesus raises the question, hey, do you think that these guys who met this horrible end, who were sacrificed, who were slaughtered in this way, do you think somehow they were especially bad sinners? Do you think this happened because they were bad people? And then he brings up a story that we have no record of anywhere around Jesus' time, only just in the story. But apparently there was this Tower of Siloam that had fallen not long ago, where also people tragically lost their lives. He says, do you think they were any worse than anybody else? Do you think these were worse sinners somehow? Because I think there is like implicit, not just in Judaism and Christianity, I think there's this almost universal human tendency to have this sense that if we're the ones who are living, so long as we're still here, maybe it's because we're doing something right and we're blessed. Only bad things happen to bad people. There's just this tendency for us to think that, to somehow associate great suffering or trauma or death in particular with somehow being cursed by God. And Jesus knows this kind of thinking is going around. He tries to overturn this, all over the place. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about how God is the one who makes the sun to shine and the rain to fall and the just and the unjust. God's heart, God's posture towards his creation is always one of love and blessing. That's all. Another story for another time, but I've never been more convinced. Even what people will call the wrath of God or judgment of God really is just the love of God experienced from a place of resistance. Like when you don't want it and you can't receive it, then that love is received as wrath or judgment. God never changes his mind about you. That's just not how he is. It's taken me all of my life to grasp those couple sentences, by the way. Been revolutionary for me. But anyway, like we still have those tendencies. I've noted in recent years, inevitably it happens again in America. I don't know if this happens in Australia, but whenever something horrible happens, inevitably some televangelist is going to attempt to blame someone for it. So there's a hurricane in Florida, and it's because of the gays in Florida, or it's because of abortionists or something like that. It's amazing to me how much you still see this kind of thing going on sometimes in these fundamentalist communities. By the way, that would only be interesting to me if someone ever, like if there was a terrible tragedy and like some televangelist said, hey guys, I'm sorry, like I looked at something on the internet last week I really shouldn't have. I think this one's on me. My bad, y'all. Sorry, guys. I think I screwed up on that one, This great mystery to how these things happen. It's never because of something like barometric pressure. Like in America, Las Vegas is Sin City, but they've never had a hurricane. Imagine that. Anyway, still looking for someone to blame. And even though I hate that instinct, there's a part of me that understands it because I understand the search for order underneath that. Because there's this sense of if we do the right thing, so long as we're the good people and we do these things, then we can control our destiny. Nothing bad will happen to us. So people really want that sense of order. So on the one hand, I love that about Jesus, that he upsets that. I love that Jesus makes it so clear that bad things never happen because God is the one who's like the karma police going around making sure everybody gets what they deserve. That's just not what God does. And even though, again, that's not the point of the message, somehow I feel like I should just maybe reiterate that right here. God is not the karma police. It is kind of true that what goes around comes around actually, but God is the one who's always interrupting that cycle with grace. He's not the one enforcing it. He's the one interrupting it. So God's not conspiring to make sure people get what they deserve. God's always interrupting that. Reaping what you sow is only half the story. God is always interjecting God's self in some way as to interrupt this. That's part of what's so beautiful about God. And yet, even with that, there's a part of this that disrupts me a bit too, because then it's oh, wait a second. So if there's not that kind of moral order where good stuff happens to the good folks, if Proverbs was the only book in the Bible that you had, you'd think that, by the way. The Old Testament, I don't take this too literally, but the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann, I love, once said that Job is in the Bible to show us that Proverbs is wrong. Which, it's an exaggerated way of saying it, but it makes sense, especially the Hebrew Bible. There's so much tension and the story comes to this kind of back and forth. And I think those kind of messages you get in the Proverbs are generally true, that yes, if you behave this way, do these things, it's a good way of living your life. And there's the kind of good that comes from that. But Job is kind of the protest book to say oh yeah, you can do all the good stuff like Proverbs talks about and still have horrible things happen to you. On the other hand, wonderful things happen to people who are just do terrible things. They still get grace too. So all of this to say, even though I love that in a way, it's also a little scary to me as well, because it's but when is God going to give me these assurances that the Tower of Siloam is not going to fall on me? Oh, wait, he's not going to give me that assurance ever. When is God going to tell me that so long as I do more contemplative prayer, as long as I read my Bible, as long as I practice spiritual disciplines, that I'm going to have some kind of insulation from the chaos of the world? Oh, he's not ever going to tell me that, because it never happens. There is still a kind of chaos out there. Right now, we're still living in a world where there is a sea. That's the beauty of that image in Revelation. There will be a time that comes when there is no sea, which is not to say there won't be an ocean. There won't be a sea, which in Hebrew represents chaos and disorder and violence, right? So there's a time. Right now, we're still living in a world where there is a sea. So Jesus makes an interesting point here. He's not one of the televangelists. He's not out telling people you need to do the right things so that God will bless you and preserve you. He's not telling people pay tithes or you'll get cancer. Jesus is against all of that kind of manipulative religious thinking. Yet he does want to say, think about what happened to these folks. Don't think you're better because you're still alive. Live awake to the kind of chaos that's at work in the world. Repent. Change your mind. Change your perspective. Reorient yourself so that you aren't mistaken, I think is a subtext here, as the thinking that somehow you're invincible, as to somehow thinking that you've just got an infinite amount of time. These same things could happen for anybody. And that is really, really sobering. He goes right from that into this interesting parable. And it's not much of a parable, really. It's such a short story. It's this simple. The vineyard owner has a tree that's not bearing fruit. He wants to cut it down. The gardener says, don't cut it down. Let's give it more time. He says, okay, sure. We'll give it some more time and see, and we'll check on it again next year. End of story. Thanks, Jesus. That's extremely illuminating. It doesn't seem to tell us a lot in one way. A lot of people will read that and kind of make these assumptions in the story that, like, the vineyard owner is God the Father and the gardener is Jesus. None of that's said in the text. The point, I think, in it is that God is always looking for opportunity. God is always patient. God is always looking to be patient. And so that's the paradox here, is that death could happen at any time. We're frail, fragile people. Meanwhile, God is patient. But we do need to be very serious and reflective about what we're doing with our lives in the meantime. Is that making sense at all? I hope this isn't coming out too convoluted. So here's what I really want to talk about, right? I mean, it's just home stretch, really. After all this setup, this is all I'm trying to say. I wanted to bring us to this point so you would contemplate your own death. That's what I want us to do in this time that we have. I want you to contemplate your own death. Isn't that delightful? We're all going to die. Man. And actually, believe it or not, we are one step closer to death today than we were yesterday. Have you thought about this? You have one step closer to the grave now than you did. This is the kind of encouragement that I came all the way from America to bring. It's like, we're all going to die. I actually do. I'm being so facetious, and yet sometimes it really does hit me that way. I'm kind of thinking, like, how are we all acting so normal, knowing we're all dying, right? And that we're all headed that way. Like, aren't we aware of what this really means? Of course, it's an incredibly sobering thing to think about. So part of what I think God does that's so beautiful, and this is the tension I want us to hold, is the more we get to know who God is and what God is like, we know that death is nothing to fear in terms of we certainly don't need to be afraid of the God who meets us on the other side of that. That really has been a profound shift in my life. Before, I was scared to death of death, dying, rapture, as I always thought about those things growing up, because I was scared to death of God. Now, thankfully, a lot of that has been reprogrammed in me. So I'm not scared that if I say a cuss word, then a moment later something terrible happens to me, and now I'm going to roast in hell and generations and be like tortured forever. But I don't believe that about God anymore. I don't believe that's what God is like. I do believe in judgment. I do believe in kind of judgment, and it does sober me up. And that's the tension that's there. It's like God is not the one that we're supposed to be afraid of. But we do need to be sober and clear-minded about the stakes of our lives. And I know there's a lot of both and happening right here. Because even the story I told in the beginning, on the one hand, our lives are small and too much destiny is not weighing on our shoulders, right? On the one hand, there is the world doesn't revolve around us. That's good news. But life is also short and therefore precious. And what we do with it counts. And I think that's the point of this story for Jesus, is trying to get us to reflect seriously and reflect critically on whether or not we're living our life in a way that we'd want to give an account for. Because no matter how much I believe in the grace and goodness of God, and I believe in it so deeply, I believe that grace is the mystery at the bottom of all the others. You know, it's embedded in all things. I mean, my life is built on grace. I don't know what I'd do without it. That said, where judgment still scares me sometimes is that there's still this part of me that knows that to be judged by God means to look in the mirror. You know, and I think that's the only reason people would have to be afraid of final judgment, is if we aren't willing to enter into judgment right here, right now. We don't want to look at ourselves. When we look at ourselves and we behold ourselves for what we really are, that can be beautiful in some ways, but also incredibly scary. Did you ever see the film The Neverending Story? Do y'all know The Neverending Story that make it to Australia? That's my favorite, children's fantasy film. That was back before, CGI, when everything looks like a video game and you had puppets, and everything was awesome in 1984. The Neverending Story is a great, great film, and I always think about the scene where, I won't give the whole setup, but Atreyu is like this mystical young warrior. He's on a quest. He has to go through a series of gates and portals. And the first gate he goes through, which as a child I thought this scene was so terrifying. There's this gate. Anybody remember the scene? There's these two statues, and laser beams come out of the eyes. And just before he gets there, he sees, and this is the only part in the movie that's a little bit scary. You see a knight over to the right, and the wind in the desert blows his little visor open, and you see the charred skeleton underneath. He'd been electrocuted when he walked through. And that happened to even all the great warriors. So Atreyu goes running through the gate. He makes it through. The laser beams come out of the eyes. They don't get him. I mean, what could be worse than statues with laser beams coming out? And yet after he gets through with that gate, which I always thought was so scary, they tell him that there's going to be a worse gate. Remember when I was a kid thinking, what could be worse than that? Because that's some pretty scary stuff back here. The next gate, though, is the one where he walks in this room, and it's nothing but a series of mirrors. And he's just looking in the mirror. He's having to face his true self. That kind of thing didn't make sense to me when I was a child. It makes so much more sense to me now. That's the kind of judgment I'm afraid of, is I'm afraid of what I'll see if I allow the Spirit to hold up the mirror. Because inevitably, I don't live my life all the time with this sense of understanding how precious it is, of understanding what a gift it is. I know that there's still ways in which I'm squandering my life in some regards. I know there's still things in that way that I want to see. What I hope I'm coming to discern now, and I hope we all can, is that actually there's nothing to be afraid of from looking in that mirror, right? It's because of the grace and mercy of God that we can look at our true selves, including things that are nasty about us, and that be okay. And it's okay to look at the ways that we're wasting and squandering our lives in some ways. Repentance is a good thing. It reorients us towards things that matter, right? And the kind of life we would really want to live. But sometimes for me, that does require that I enter into this kind of space of just remembering, okay, yes, in a giant eschatological, long-term way, we've got all the time in the world in the sense that God's kingdom will go on forever and ever. But in terms of the kind of and quality of life that we're living right now, this that we're doing right now, does it go on forever? And what we do with this time that we have, it matters. All this language in Scripture about life being like a vapor, here in 1 minute and it's gone the next. It matters what we do with what we've been given. There's a poem that I really love by Mary Oliver. I don't know if you guys know Mary Oliver well. She has been a real gift to me in this season of my life, because I think often that's what's so powerful about poetry, and we heard some great poetry last night, by the way, here, but that it gives language to feelings that otherwise we don't know how to express. And this is one poem that's been especially significant to me in this season. It's a poem of Mary Oliver's called The Summer Day, where she writes, "Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do not know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Does it everything die at last and too soon? Tell me," and this is one of my favorite lines ever, "tell me what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." Isn't that beautiful? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So like Mary Oliver, here we are in the beauty of all of these beautiful creative just created things. We're in the middle of all the plants and trees and the ocean and the rocks and the breeze and all these things that remind us of the grandeur and beauty of God. Reminds us of how small we are, and reminds us alongside of that how short and temporal life is. It just raises the questions. What are we going to do with what we've been given? Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Not, again, in the old televangelist way that I described, as a fear tactic to say, I hope you're not being naughty. If you're being naughty, you need to cut that out. But of really reflecting on, what am I really doing with my life right now? You know? Doesn't mean that everybody needs to be doing something dramatic. Certainly doesn't mean everybody needs to be doing full-time ministry. Good Lord, that'd be the worst thing for the world. But just this sense, of living your life in such a way to where you know that you're doing something that you feel put here to do. Some of that has to do, of course, I think first and foremost with relationships. It has to do with loving people around us really well. I think that's always the most defining things about who we are and what we're going to become. Some of that has to do with how we live in community. Are we investing in the kinds of relationships we really feel called to? Are we really investing our love in someone in particular? Not just this vague, generic sense of love, but are we investing in particular lives? Some of it is, for some of it, at least a vocational question. Is there something that you really feel like God has put inside of you to do that you really feel like you're supposed to do? And if so, what would it look like to lean into that right now? What are some things right now that need to be trimmed or cut back in some way so that you can move into that kind of life? What are some things that you need to be doing more of? If I can put this in as simple a way as possible, I think sometimes that's what discernment looks like for me right now, is just giving space for the Spirit to just gently reveal, okay, here's some things that just really right now just feel like wasting time. Why don't you do less of that? Okay. And here's some things right now that really are life-giving. Barbara Brown Taylor raises that question I love so much. That she says that's her defining question for people all the time is, what's saving your life right now? I'll think about that. What's saving my life right now? Okay, maybe I should do more of that. What would it look like to do less of the stuff that right now feels like it's draining my energy and draining my batteries in a way that's just not constructive, whether or not it's sin? Phil taught that so well from Hebrews last night, just that bit of Hebrews. Laying aside sin, sure, but also the weights, like anything that entangles us, anything that ensnares us. Just what does it look like to do less of those things? I'm just really hoping that even this morning, that this would just be an opportunity to enter into that kind of reflection where there could just be some degree of clarity, just some sense of what is it that God right now is calling you to do less of? What is God calling you to do more of? Because you do just have this one wild and precious life. It does matter. It matters tremendously. It matters to me. It matters to God. It matters to the world. What are you going to do with what you've been given? Not that heavy-handed, the weight of the world rests on your shoulders. When I'm sorry, I'm having such a good time. I hope you're not bored, are you? If you're bored, I can't stop at any point. Because right now I'm having a little bit of fun. You know, when I was a youth pastor, I did that for about 6.5, 7 years. And I did it the best way I knew how, which is the way I saw people in front of me do it, so I know I had some of these themes, you know. Back in those days, it's like I feel like every youth event I ever went to was this whole dramatic, you know, let's go, you need to go back and change your school for God. Never mind the fact that I've literally never seen that happen. I've never seen somebody come in, here's the little evangelist, and he's just going to turn the school upside down for God. What horrible pressure, right? No wonder after those youth encounters that students would end up getting so depressed a couple months in because nobody's doing that. Not come in and love a handful of friends really well and bear witness to the gospel the best way you know how. Change your school for God. Again, this is the American way though, right? This is how we talk. It's just all everybody's supposed to be Billy Graham and do all these outrageous things. I've never seen any of that happen. I've never seen one person just every soul in the school was changed because you were there. Probably not, right? Hospitals were emptied. It's this is unrealistic, you know? So it's not that kind of pressure, but it's supposed to be a lot more subtle than that. Life is a gift. It's precious. We don't have all the time in the world in some ways. So what does it look like to just be a good steward of the gift that God's given us? I didn't know if I wanted to bring this up, but I'll tell you something that I've thought about recently that's just, I don't even know what to do with it. I just felt the Lord brought it back to my attention. So I had a really weird moment a couple years ago. And I think this is the way that I still feel the most Pentecostal, is I'm more of a mystic than I want to be, kind of an accidental mystic. Stuff happens that I don't really want to happen. And I think, well, that's just weird. What are you going to do? But there was a day, and this was also kind of in that same season where a lot of things in my life I felt like were falling apart and were deconstructed. But there was one day in particular where, and I thought about this specifically because of this parable. I read this particular author treat this parable in a way that was really meaningful to me. I remember on a Wednesday morning, I heard somewhere, I think it was on the internet, I saw Robert Farrar Capen's name mentioned. Never heard of him before. He was an Episcopal priest. Learned a lot more about him later. Who, this really interesting man. He just had this kind of lust for life. He loved to cook. He wrote a book about cooking and theology in the 1960s called The Supper of the Lamb. Just a very colorful character. Later went through a painful divorce and some difficult things in his life. But that seemed to just push him all the more to just kind of have this radical grace message. And one day in particular, I had read something about Capen, and I was getting ready to do a series on parables at our church. And I found his book on the parables. And honestly, in that kind of obsessive way that I basically read most of the book in a day. I just devoured it. And I thought that there was something about how he communicated these ideas, the scandal of grace, the edge of grace, that just so bore witness with my own spirit. And not aggrandizing myself like I think I'm good like this, but it just felt like the same kind of calling that's on my life. I feel called to talk like this. This sounds like me. And in a way, and it's like, how did I not know this person exists? I kind of like Robert Farrar Capon is my spirit animal here. It's sort of, I just thought I just can't believe how much this writing just seems to encapsulate all these things that I feel, but I don't always know how to say. And it was really profound. It was like arresting. And so I'm reading Capon all day long. And that night, I happen to check my Twitter feed, and I see a tweet, I don't remember even who the tweet was from, saying, author and theologian Robert Farrar Capon died today at 88 years old. And I thought, that's just spooky. I mean that, okay, I could have discovered this person's work at any point in my life, but to discover it the day that he dies, and to read him all day for like 10 hours, and he's 88 years old. Like, what are the odds of that? I don't know what all that means, but I know that some sense of it was I had this kind of something in me just sort of clicked. That was kind of like, I really had this sense that something of the kind of calling that had been on his life is on my life now. I think I'm supposed to do something like that. I think something of that is being transferred onto me somehow. If that sounds mystical and weird, I know. I don't get it either. But I just felt that very profoundly. And it was so interesting then even going back and reading this text made me reread Capon's book on the parables. And it brought me back to that kind of thing of, oh, wait a second. So if I'm called supposed to be doing that, am I really doing that right now? Am I embodying that kind of radical grace? Am I living that out? Is that the message of my life right now? Because I feel like that's what God was giving me on that day, is that this is supposed to be the message of my life. So is it the message of my life? Am I really living from that place? Is that what I'm doing? I hope this is helpful in some way. It's hot in here, isn't it? Let's take a couple minutes to pray. We've got more time tonight, I know, but I just want to invite you just to close your eyes, take just a moment to just get centered and still. And I just want to remind you, even before we begin to pray, just because I think maybe you need to hear this first, just to remember that perfect love casts out all fear. God doesn't want you to be afraid of death. God doesn't want you to be afraid of life. God doesn't want you to be afraid of your future. God doesn't want you to be fearful because of anything of the past. God wants you to be so, so free. And so there's no condemnation in any of this. There's no reason that any of us need to be fearful or ashamed about encountering the Lord or allowing God to hold up that mirror and show us our true selves. But with all of that in view, knowing that we're safe and knowing that we're loved, let's really reflect on that question. What right now are you really doing with the life you've been given? Are you really doing what you want to do on the deepest level? Not in terms of just kind of, I know we have fleeting desires and wants, but what your soul wants. Is that the kind of life that you have now? The kind of person that you want to become? Are you really living on that trajectory right now? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Spirit, we just invite you now to just open us up. Thank you that we can do that without any inhibition and without any fear, that you open up the contents of our hearts. And you, Spirit, as the one who searched the depths of God, also you search our depths. And you reveal the truth of us. You reveal the truth that we don't always know how to tell. And that's the fact. That's honest, God, is that we just don't often know how to tell the truth of our own stories unless you reveal it to us. Help us now to see. Help us to see, God, just with sober, earnest eyes and ears right now. Help us to see the ways that we're wasting time. Help us to see the things that we're doing right now that we just need to be doing less of. Not because you're so displeased with us, but it's just less than your best for us. It's less than what you've created us for. God, help us to see the things right now that are saving our lives. Help us to see the things that are life-giving. Help us to see the things that are causing us to be more conformed to the image of your Son. Help us to get a clearer sense of that and to lean into it more, to do more of that and less of the other. Just that simple, God. Give us clarity, grace, and perspective to see our lives truthfully, not whitewashing anything, not spinning anything, not doing any PR, just allowing you to to direct us, allowing you to really speak. In just a moment, I'm going to put the microphone down, and I'm just going to invite. And then, Phil, I'll just whenever you feel led to come back up, that'll be great. But I want to just kind of leave it on that note, just to take a couple moments more, just to be in this open, honest posture of contemplation, allowing the Holy Spirit to search us. Like David prayed, that God would search us, know us, that would try our anxious thoughts, to invite the sweet judgment of the Lord that reorients us and that realigns us. That just feels so good to me right now. Just sense that God just so graciously wants to realign some of us right now. Just realignment so that we're living our life according to our deepest desires, according to things that matter most to us anyway. God, just grant us the grace to be able to see.